95 this morning. Go ahead and keep your finger there if you have a Bible with you. If you don't have a Bible with you, guess what? You're in luck. If you look at the seat in front of you, there should be a little rack under the seat there, and it should have a black Bible in it. With that Bible, you'll be able to follow along with us that way, or we will have the scripture behind me up on the big screen, either way. If you don't own a Bible at all, feel free to take that Bible home with you. The one under the chair, not the one behind me, you can't have the screen. But feel free to take that one home with you, okay? It's a gift, so you can have that. That's yours. And so like I said, just kind of keep your finger on Psalm 95. We'll be referencing it quite a bit, but be going to other places as well. So has anyone this morning, let me say that not necessarily this morning, but in general, ever had a bad day? You laugh. Of course, everybody in this room would raise their hands, right? If we were taking that kind of poll, right? Everybody has had a bad day. Everyone has had a good day. That is something, obviously, everybody here can say, yep, I've done that, okay? But the really cool thing about the idea of a bad day or a good day is it's all relative, right? The way that I perceive a good day is different how you would perceive a good day, right? I like to go camping. I like to be outside. So a good day for me I'd go camping, I'd go hiking, I'd go and enjoy nature. Yeah, even if it's really muddy, that's fine. I'll still go outside and I'll enjoy myself. And then there are other people, Nikki, who would say, that sounds horrible. I don't like to be hot. I don't like to be sticky. I don't like to swat bugs. That sounds horrific. Why would you find that enjoyable? But me, I find that relaxing, right? So you might describe that as a bad day. And then even on top of that, someone might be like, you call that a bad day? I just lost my son 2 days ago in a car accident. That's a bad day. So see, bad, good, it's all perspective, right? It's all relative depending on how you experience life, okay? Here's the good news. As we are going through Psalms, all of these can relate back to how we personally experience our emotions. All of them. Whether it be good emotions, bad emotions, right? Psalms is filled with laments. It's filled with praises, like we're going to be talking about today, okay? Psalms is filled with those kind of things. But here's the even better part. And this is one of the reasons why we wanted to go through the book. This is why we called it the heart of God's people. Okay, is all of these individual experiences that we have and the way that we experience our emotions, good days, bad days, whatever, right? We all feel them individually, but when we point them and direct them through Psalms, it all points us to one God. It all points us to an ultimate truth, an absolute truth that God is King. God is Lord. God is in charge. God is sovereign. It all points us back to that one thing, and that's something that even though we experience life individually, that's a corporate experience that we all get to enjoy, right? So that's one of the great things about going through Psalms, is you can find yourself in it, but then also you realize other people are feeling the same way and experience hardships that are very similar. Okay? Now, like I said, so today we are going to be in Psalm 95, which is a psalm of worship. Okay? It's a psalm of praise. So today is going to be, I know last week was somewhat heavy, okay? So today's going to be super light and enjoyable. There's going to be some heavy points. But we get to talk about worship, which is always a fun topic to go over. So what I want us to talk about are three main things. This is going to be a nice classic 3-point sermon, all right? So if you're one of those people that like to take notes, you've got a piece of paper and like to write things down as people talk, if you're one of those kind of people, here are the main 3 headings you can write down, okay? What we're going to be talking about today is what is worship? Why do we worship? And how? How do we worship? All right? Pretty simple. What, why, and how. All right? So we're going to start out with what. What is worship? And probably going to spend a majority of our time talking about this. Ideally. I'll try to keep my eye on the crowd, and if I see too many people falling asleep, we'll move on. Okay? Okay, what is worship? So let's go ahead and turn, and let's learn about worship straight from Jesus. All right? Let's go ahead and turn to Matthew, the book of Matthew. Chapter 15, and we're going to be reading verses 8 through 9. Okay, I'll give you guys a second to get there. I'm sure they've already got you beat up there. Yep, it's already behind me. Okay, Matthew 15, verses 8 through 9. Okay, I'll go ahead and read that. This people honors me. All right, I'm going to stop. That was quick, right? Whenever we're talking about this people in context of this sermon, let's go ahead and insert us. All right, let's just say we, us. All right, let's think of it that way, okay? So we honor him with lips, with their lips, as it says here. But their heart is far from me. All right, I'm going to stop again. So Jesus is here talking about worship, okay? So we're going to get there in the second part of this passage, okay? But Jesus, like most times when he's teaching, like most times when he's trying to get a point across, he's worried about your heart, okay? So here we're seeing a clear contrast between action and heart, okay? The action here is honors me with their lips, all right? There's the action, all right? But their heart, so his heart is far from me. So he's saying that even though their actions might show that they're praising me, that's actually not what's happening at all, okay? Let's make that very clear. So now, in light of that, let's read verse 9. In vain do they worship me. Vain in this context, let's think of zero, nothing, nada, right? In vain do they worship. That means their worship means nothing. Why doesn't their worship mean anything? Because their heart is not in it. Okay? Like I said, Jesus is concerned about your heart, not what you're doing. Okay? You can come to church for the last 15 years, sing praise and worship songs every Sunday morning, till you're sweating, till you lose your voice, you're straining your voice because you're trying to sing louder than anybody else, you've got tennis elbow, right, because you got your hands so high. It doesn't matter, right? You can do all of those things for the last 15 years, but if your heart is not in it, it means nothing. Jesus says that worship is vain. Zero. Okay? Now, something else that actually I didn't even catch until I reread my notes this morning, okay? And I thought this was really interesting. Teaching as doctrines, okay? In vain do they worship me. Teaching as doctrines, meaning, let's think of it as scripture, canon, truth, right? All those kind of words that you could kind of throw in there, okay? Teaching as doctrines, the commandment of man. Jesus is saying that the authority of man, what he's saying here is the authority of man is being put at a higher value above God. And because of that, their heart is far from him. Because if you're putting something above God, then you're dropping God down. Okay? Now we're going to get into value system here in just a second. But I want us to understand that there is an action, all right? Worship has two parts, okay? So when we're talking about what is worship, it has two parts. It's inner and outer, okay? It's both. So what Jesus is talking about here is mainly the inner portion because he's concerned about our heart, okay? And then secondary, he's worried about the outer. That's the lips singing. That's the raising of the hands. That's all the stuff that you would see at a church, right, when you're praising. Like, that's secondary to the condition of our heart. Proverbs 4:23 tells us, keep your heart with all vigilance, for from it flows the springs of life. Okay, so even in the Old Testament, it talks about the importance of guarding our hearts, watching where our heart is. So in light of that, how do we fix that? How do we keep our heart in check when it comes to worship? Well, we kind of already touched on a little bit, this idea of putting the commandments of man above God, the value system that we have, right? Whatever you value, that's where your heart is, okay? So let's talk about that a little bit. So the idea of worship, okay, in Old English language would actually been called worth-ship. Okay, TH, add that TH back in there, worth-ship, okay? Now, I was, after reading some different people kind of talk about this idea of worth-ship, a lot of people like the idea that whenever you provide worship to something, when you worship something, you're giving it value, right? You're giving it worth, all right? And to be honest with you, I think that's close, but it's a little off center, because there is no way that we can give value, that we can give worth to God, because he has all of the glory, all of the worth. There is nothing that necessarily we are giving him, okay? But there is still worth in the idea of worthship, okay? I told Sarah I wasn't going to go here because we kind of talked about this morning, but I think it's important. So what we're talking about is literally intrinsic value and extrinsic value, okay? And what I mean by that is it doesn't matter how much worth you give God or how much value you give God. Because at the end of the day, that does not change his value, right? He has ultimate value, ultimate worth. He has all the glory, whether you choose to recognize it or not, okay? Because he has intrinsic value, okay? But what we're talking about, what Jesus is concerned about in the book of Matthew here, what he's concerned about is the intrinsic, where you put him on your value system, how much you recognize his value in your life. Do we understand the difference there? Do we get that? Okay? The best way that I could define this idea of intrinsic, extrinsic value whenever we're trying to think about what is worship is through an illustration. So we're going to tell a little story here, okay? So this is a story about a young woman who recently lost a grandmother, okay? And as happens all the time, when the grandmother passes away, she gives things away, right? So this young woman inherits some jewelry, some old jewelry of her grandmother's, okay? For sake of the illustration, it's called a brooch, okay? It's because I like the word brooch. So she inherits this brooch from her grandmother. Now, as she was going through some of the stuff, right, she opened it up and noticed it and like, oh, I remember this. Mammy used to wear this all the time at church. Every Sunday for the last 50 years, she would wear this brooch. Immediately, this young woman, is putting value on this piece of jewelry, okay? Now, granted, at this point, it is simply an emotional value. She's connecting this brooch with fond memories of her grandmother. Therefore, it has value to her. It doesn't matter what the actual value of the piece is. Doesn't matter, right? She's giving it value, okay? Does that make sense? All right, let's keep going. So, out of curiosity, the young woman decides to take it to a jeweler just to get it appraised. Like, you know what? She wore that thing for 50 years. I'm curious how much it's worth. It's got to be old. I'm going to stop holding the invisible jewelry. So she takes it to the jeweler to get it appraised, right? Walks in, hands it to him. He takes it, just kind of examines it a little bit, goes, okay, hold on. Sets it down, gets one of those little monocle jeweler things, right? And starts examining the jewelry, okay? Now, when a jeweler is examining any piece, okay, specifically diamonds. Let's talk about diamonds, okay? What he's looking for is how the light refracts inside of the gem, okay? How it, breaks up into the different beams and the different, the red, the rainbow, you know what I'm saying, right? Okay, so he's looking at how it refracts inside, looking for imperfections, kind of like that. So, he's really having to look hard at this piece in order to realize what its value, right? So he can appraise it. So at this point, he has no value with this piece of jewelry. It means absolutely nothing to him. As of right now, it is simply a logical train of thought of trying to decide how much value it has, okay? So we already have two approaches to this piece of jewelry: an emotional connection that has value and a logical connection that at this point has no value. As the jeweler continues to examine the jewel, he just drops it. He drops it, sits back in his chair, starts just sweating profusely, maybe turns pale, the monocle drops from his eye, he starts breathing heavily because all of a sudden he realizes the value of what he has in his hand. He realizes at that point that whatever this is, however how old it is, whatever is more valuable than any piece of jewelry that he has in his shop. In fact, it's more valuable than any piece that he has ever had in his shop. In fact, this is some ancient craftsmanship that can no longer be made. It is a one-of-a-kind thing. It'll never happen again. It only has happened once. It has a priceless value. There is nothing equal to it. And he is just awestruck. He is thunderstruck with this idea of what he had in his hand. And because of what he's experienced through his logical train of thought and being able to examine this piece, he's recognized the true value of what it is. And it has created an emotional and logical, thought-provoking reaction to what it is. And move forward to the woman that now understands what she has. She already had value in it, but think about how her life has changed now, knowing the value of something that she has. She's had it all along, but now she realizes really what it means. And from here on, her entire life has been changed in concordance to what she knows the value of this piece to be. So see, it doesn't matter how you come to the conclusion of knowing how valuable God truly is. Maybe you have some emotional connection to church. You've attended church all of your life, and you have fond memories of going with your parents, everything like that, but you've never actually recognized the value of who God truly is. You've never been there, right? You've never experienced that, but you have an emotional connection to the church, and all you got to do is understand his true value before you have that connection. Or maybe you've been an atheist your entire life, and you have to get there by a logical train of thought to understand exactly who God is. It doesn't matter how you get there, but as soon as you recognize the value of God, it changes your entire life. It reorientates how you live your life moving forward. That's worship. Worship is not a Sunday morning experience where you come in and sing and praise. Worship changes your entire life because you are understanding, you are recognizing that God has ultimate value above anything else in your life. That's worship, right? Through this entire experience of getting the piece of praise, everything like that, the value of that jewelry never changed. Never. It was always rare. It was always priceless. But it wasn't until they recognized it that changed their life. And that's how you change your heart. You recognize what God truly means. And that changes the way you think about him. And hence, change the way you live your life. Not just Sunday morning praise and worship. So what that does is it finally gets us to Psalm 95, verse 1. Finally we get there. Oh, come, let us sing to the Lord. Let us make a joyful noise. But see, those first two lines in Psalm 95 mean nothing until you understand the intrinsic value of who God is. Only then can you fully appreciate verse 1. That was a long explanation to get there, but I think it was worth it. So let's get to point 2. But without the right heart, it means nothing. This leads us to point 2, which is, why do we worship? Why? And a lot of, I'm sure some of you in the audience, if I can speak this morning, geez, some of you in the audience this morning even kind of thinking like, well, of course you worship. Like, he's God. That's why you worship. Duh. Okay, let's break that down a little bit and fully understand what we're talking about. Okay, why do we worship? There's 2 big reasons that I want to talk about why we worship. So if you're a note taker, you got your main headlines, which is going to be, what is worship? Why do we worship? How do we worship? Right? Under why, let's do an A and a B. Okay? First one we're going to talk about is the majesty of God. That's why we worship, okay? And the majesty of God, we're going to find in verses 3 through 5. in Psalm 95. Let's read those real quick. For the Lord is a great God and a great king above all gods. In his hand are the depths of the earth, and the heights of the mountains are his also. The sea is his, for he made it, and his hands formed the dry land. So let's first understand the majesty of God means he created everything, everything is his, and he's in charge. That's the majesty of God, right? He is king. He is Lord. And just like the value system that we were talking before, it doesn't matter if you recognize it or not, he's still king and he's still Lord, right? It's there no matter what. The difference is, do you choose to make him Lord of your life? Do you choose for him to be king in your life and make him majesty of your life? But the thing is, it doesn't take it away if you choose no. That's something that's just his, okay? He created all, and all is his. He has all the glory, all the weight is his. And there's nothing we can do to take it away or give it to him. Now, the crazy thing is, this first point, the majesty of God, 21st century Americans just can't really get there. Like, I think we understand the concept of a majesty, right? Of kings, lords. We understand that. And we've talked about that here several times. The idea that we don't understand the idea of a king. We understand it mentally, but not in the idea of an actual servanthood under a king, right? Like, we've just never lived in that life, right? So, of course not. So it's hard for us to truly say, I worship God because he is king. I think that's hard for us. And I think we can all be honest and say that, okay? But it's still a reason, okay? And I think it's important that we recognize that it is a reason to worship him, okay? But it's hard. So that brings us to point number 2. So why do we worship? The majesty of God. The second one is the salvation we get from God. Salvation. Because the last part of verse 1, "O come, let us sing to the Lord, let us make a joyful noise to the rock of our salvation." Now this one perks up our ears, because we can understand the concept that I'm not perfect. I do things wrong. I hurt people's feelings. Therefore, I need forgiven. I need help. I need a God that will rescue me, right? And we can understand that concept on an emotional level more than the idea of a majesty or a king, right? We can get there, okay? We understand that salvation is needed, okay? That we all sin, we all fall short of the glory of God. We all fall short there. And we understand this idea, right, that God came down, right, took on flesh, right, became from great to not so great, right, took on flesh, but then was brutally killed on a cross, draped our sin upon him, died so we didn't have to. Because see, God could have done this much differently. At the very beginning of the fall, in Genesis 3, when all of that went down, God could just simply wipe the board and start completely over. Because there's no way to fully eradicate sin from the earth without killing all of us. Okay? We might say prayers like, Lord, just take the sin away. Just remove sin from this planet, and that way everything will be hunky-dory. Right? We might even say prayers like that. Okay? Just remove COVID. Remove the sin that's causing this. But what we're actually praying is, Lord, kill all of us. Because there's no way for sin to leave this planet without us going with it. Okay? But what does God choose to do? Does he choose to eradicate all of us? No. He chooses a way to redeem us through Jesus' blood. To make us whole, to make us right. He chooses to do that. And here's something I want us to recognize. I want us to recognize the depth of our brokenness, okay, in this. Because think about this. If we choose to only worship God because of salvation, that is a selfish reason to worship. If that's your only way, right? If I say, I worship God because he saved me, you're saying, I'm worshiping a God that does something for me. Ouch. That's the depth of our brokenness, that even in that form of worship, that worship in itself is selfish. That's why you have to have both. You can't just say, I worship him because he saved me. It's like, I worship him because he saved me and because he is majesty and Lord of all. It's an imbalance if you only choose one. The depth of our brokenness, even in our worship, is something I want us to recognize, but I also want us to realize. Romans 5, verses 8 through 9. And you can turn there if you want, but I'm trying to move things along here, so I'm just going to go ahead and read it. Romans 5, 8 through 9. This is one of my favorite set of verses. But God shows his love for us in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. So even in our blasphemy, even in our selfishness, whenever we are trying to worship him, even in that broken praise, Christ said, I know that you're not going to be able to do this right. I know it's going to be broken. I know it's going to be that way, but I'm still choosing to die a horrible death on this cross for you. I'm still choosing. That doesn't change what I'm wanting to do for you. And I love verse 9. Since therefore we have now been justified by his blood, much more shall we be saved by him from the wrath of God. And what I want to focus on right there is the word justified. It means we are made just before God because of what Christ done. Every time that, yes, maybe you think, Lord, thank you so much for saving me. Right? Every time you're choosing to worship only because of salvation, not because of his lordship, not because of his majesty, anytime that's imbalanced there, okay, or any other time that you're asking for forgiveness, any of that, the word justified by Christ's blood literally means that we are made just in the eyes of God. When he looks upon us, because of our faith in Jesus Christ and his blood, it covers and it cleanses that sin. So God looks upon us and says, there is no sin in that man. There is no sin in that woman. All I see is Jesus. Even in that blasphemy, even in that selfishness, Christ died to redeem you. We're getting really quick, low on time, so I want to go ahead and move into how. How do we worship? And what I want us to understand there is the very first lie that we were really told in the Bible. And I do want us to turn there, okay? Because I want us to read this. I want us to see the words. Genesis chapter 3, verse 5. And this is the fall, right? And this is enemy talking to Eve, all right? Yep, we already have it up there. All right. For God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be open, meaning the fruit, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. All right, I want us to repeat after me. Ready? I am not God. And I don't want his job. Okay, now just the left side. I am not God. Right side, I am not God. Everybody at home, I am not God. That was weird, right? That was weird. Okay. We are not God. We will never be like him. And there is no apple or banana that's going to change that. Okay? I love bananas. But it doesn't make me God. Okay? It's the very first lie we were told, and we believed it. And think, well, if I was in her position, I wouldn't have done that. Yes, you would have. Yes, you would have. The idea of worship. And we kind of touched on it yesterday, last Sunday, at the call to worship, Hebrews 13:15. Through him, then, let us continually offer up a sacrifice of praise to God. When we worship, it should always be a sacrifice. It's a sacrifice of time. It's a sacrifice of resources, right? Everybody here this morning is sacrificing time to come and worship God because you could be somewhere else. But you're choosing to be here. You're choosing to sacrifice your time and say, no, I'm going to the house of the Lord to be with my brothers and sisters to worship God. You're making that choice. That's a sacrifice. I commend you for that. Okay? I mean, think about the leadership of the church, right? If you choose to become a deacon, leadership team, work in the children's area, whatever. That is a sacrifice of time that you're choosing. You're making a conscious choice to say, I'm going to take my time and give it to the kingdom because I value God, his lordship, more than I value my own time. That's a sacrifice. That is a form of worship. Giving of money is a form of worship, right? It's always a sacrifice. And we get that also in Psalms 95, verses 6 through 7. Let's read that real quick. Oh, come, let us worship and bow down. Let us kneel before the Lord our Maker, for he is our God, and we are the people of his pasture and the sheep of his hand. Praise is always, it's a bow, right? It's a kneel. Now, I'm not saying, next Sunday I expect everybody to be on their knees worshiping, okay? Again, Jesus is more concerned of your heart, right? So that's what we're talking about here. But if we're thinking about what is worship, going back to that original question, what is worship? That is acknowledging and recognizing the ultimate value that God has and reorientating our life to live with that knowledge. That's worship, okay? So I'm going to close and ask worship team to come back up, or just Scott, I guess. That might be all he's doing. He's behind me. I want us to think about this kind of in a practical way here. So I'll go ahead and scoot down here and get out of your way. So think about this week. Think about some of the problems you may be dealing with, okay? Think about maybe money issues. If you watch the news, a lot of people, I'm sure, are losing work, right? So maybe it's money issues. Maybe it's health problems, right? Those seem to be the two big ones, okay? Other personal problems, whatever. I don't care. Make a list if it helps you, okay? Write it down, make a list. Give your top 4 things that are just really hurting your heart. Pray through all of them, but very specifically. Pray in a way, how do I value God more than this problem? It's kind of weird to think. It's like, no, I'm not going to worry about money because I value God more than money. It's weird. It's like, well, but I still got to look for a job. There's still some practical things you need to do there. But like I said, we're talking about a heart issue here. Don't worry about the lips side of that Matthew 15:8, okay? Don't worry about that. I want you to worry about the heart problem. Worry about the heart problem. How does the acknowledgement or you recognizing the value of God, his true value, how does that change where he ranks in your book? Because remember, it doesn't matter how much value you give him. He has intrinsic value. You can't take anything or give anything to him. But there is still a value system that you put on him in your life. So I asked this morning, where does he rank? So as Scott sings here, just feel free to respond any way you feel led. You can come up here and pray if you'd like. There's cards in the back of the table that could help you maybe direct in a director's response there. There's questions that you could answer back there. Either way, pray where you are. I just invite you to respond in some way and think through how God ranks in your value system.